At the end of the Third Age, under the walls of Minas Tirith, Gondor and its allies inflict upon Sauron's armies one of the most violent tactical maneuvers in the art of war. Here is what happened. On March 15th, this is the situation at the walls of Minas Tirith. Sauron's armies are laying siege to the city. Mordor holds the advantage with numerical superiority and operational initiative. The city is close to falling when the Rohirrim arrive, turning the siege into an open field battle, with Theoden's cavalry striking from the north. The Mordorian right flank has no cavalry screen and no Mumakil positioned to absorb a mounted shock. In medieval warfare, cavalry charging infantry that is not properly formed and without immediate support produces a predictable outcome. The lines break, orc formations scatter, the Rohirrim push forward, and the Mordorian army cannot react. Cohesion collapses, and the center cannot immediately compensate. Mordor's right wing is destabilized, its center under pressure, its entire operational coherence threatened. In such a situation, the correct response is clear. Stop the Rohirrim's advance, stabilize the center, and reconstitute the shattered flank using reserves. And this is exactly what happens. The Haradrim dispatch their cavalry. Behind them come the Mumakil deployed further south. At that precise moment, Tolkien tells us that Imrahil understands the tactical opportunity. He leads the entire garrison in a sortie. The cavalry of Minas Tirith charges outward, seeking junction with the Rohirrim. Behind them, infantry pours through the cleared gate, forms ranks, and drives back the orcs of Morgul beneath the southern walls. The Sauron cavalry is destroyed, but the Rohirrim eventually collide with the Mumakil, and the horses refuse to charge. The line stabilizes, and the Mordorian center is preserved. Simultaneously, reserves of Easterlings, Variags, and Southrons move to rebuild the right flank. This maneuver now threatens the rear of the Rohirrim, who have advanced too deeply. At this point, both armies are fully engaged. The Mumakil are under attack from Gondorian archers, Rohan's cavalry is pressured by Mordor's reserves, and the entire line is locked in contact. Equilibrium is restored, and because Mordor retains numerical superiority, the advantage begins to shift back to Sauron. But then Aragorn arrives by river. He lands with thousands of men from southern Gondor, now freed from the Corsair threat. At that moment, Gothmob has already committed his reserves to repair the right flank, and he cannot redeploy. The new assault strikes from the opposite side. The balance collapses, and finally, the Mordorian army breaks. What we are seeing here is a fundamental tactical principle in action, applied completely unintentionally. You strike one wing to force a full enemy reaction, a committed response, a forced move. Once the enemy has committed everything, you strike the opposite wing. At that point, he can no longer react, and the imbalance becomes definitive. Now, some may ask, how can such a collapse occur despite numerical superiority? The answer actually lies earlier in the campaign, and this is exactly what we break down in Part 2. I highly recommend checking it out. So instead, let's see how an open battle would have unfolded, as originally intended. Consider the alternative, with Aragorn and the Rohirrim arriving before the battle, so the defenders avoid a reactive engagement. Now let us turn to Sauron's deployment, from Mordor's perspective. Tactical deployment is the organization of forces before battle to maximize strengths, protect vulnerabilities, and shape the fight. It defines positioning, reserves, and the concentration of force. A flawed deployment, even with superior numbers, creates exploitable weaknesses. From Mordor's perspective, three deployment options emerge. The first is flawed deployment, a broad, extended line across the battlefield. With numerical superiority, Mordor can dictate the width of the front, stretch the line beyond its opponent, and occupy more ground. On paper, it seems logical. Mass distributed across a wide front, pressure applied simultaneously, no obvious weak sector. But it is predictable, symmetrical, and favors the side with qualitative advantages. An extended linear formation spreads superiority rather than focusing it, leaving gaps for a mobile opponent to exploit. The second option is the oblique order, in its first form, where one wing advances decisively while the other is deliberately held back, a maneuver famously used by Alexander at Gaugamela to reshape the battlefield and control the engagement. The objective here is not immediate destruction, but control. You use the terrain to your advantage, maintain the initiative, and keep the battle moving, forcing the enemy to react instead of simply absorbing his numerical pressure. But this does not suit Sauron's situation. He does not need to manage pressure. He already has numerical superiority. And more importantly, delaying a wing would create freedom of maneuver for Gondor's cavalry. Any sector intentionally weakened or held back would open operational space for mounted exploitation, amplifying the defender's only real advantage. And instead of controlling the battle, Sauron would risk losing control of it. The third option is the oblique order, in its second form, with one wing reinforced and the other deliberately weakened not to delay the fight, but to impose a decisive imbalance at a chosen point. The weakened wing does not seek maneuver. It fixes the enemy, contains him, and absorbs pressure, while the reinforced wing concentrates mass to break the line irreversibly. And this is where numerical superiority becomes decisive, because it allows you to create overwhelming strength at a specific point without completely compromising the rest. For Mordor, this would have meant structuring the battlefield so that one sector contained Rohan's cavalry under controlled pressure, while the opposite sector is aimed to shatter the defender's formation. And once that rupture is achieved, the rest of the line collapses as a consequence. Numerical superiority, when properly concentrated, does not just withstand imbalance, it creates it. Now, when we step back and look at the bigger picture, Sauron's long-prepared plan is effective. He mobilizes peoples and armies at scale. His organization and logistics are fully developed, and he is already achieving tangible results. Pelargir is taken. The crossings of the Anduin are secured with the capture of Osgiliath and Caer Andros. These are campaign-level successes. But war is not decided by positions alone. To turn operational success into strategic victory, an army must achieve a decisive result. And that decisive moment could have taken place on the Pelennor fields. With numerical superiority and a coherent tactical deployment, Mordor had the means to win a major field battle, and only then impose a siege on Minas Tirith from a position of strength. Instead, Sauron is drawn into a premature confrontation. He commits to a siege against a capital that is still standing, still defended, and still supported by its allies. And in doing so, he abandons the conditions required for decisive victory, which, in the end, proves Aragorn right. The hasty stroke goes oft astray.